to the course on energy and conversion markets. It's the one module course, and in the module, we will be discussing the uh, climate aspect of the energy and its integration with the carbon market. In the first section, we will discuss on the climate challenges, greenhouse gas emissions, and then we will discuss the international regime for climate stabilization and climate change mitigation, like national determined contribution indices and net zero goals of the countries. Then we will discuss the market mechanism under the Paris Climate Agreement, and we will also brief on the carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology, which is CCUS. So, in the Indian context, India have developed the National Action Plan on Climate uh, Challenge commitments under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement uh, for the national GHG inventory estimation. And then we will discuss the existing energy related market mechanisms and then NDC goals for mitigation, accounting, and reporting. And then we will discuss the carbon assessment techniques like gases, sectors, methodologies, policy, regulations, and protocols. And then we will discuss the estimation of the carbon footprint IPCC guidelines for national GHG inventory with the some cases study. Coming to the carbon markets, we will cover the carbon economics, pricing incentives, and its related cost, market-based mechanisms, cap trade, carbon trading, voluntary and compliance carbon markets in India, existing mechanisms, and the future design. Then we will also discuss the introduction to the internal carbon pricing and the carbon labeling. Then we will discuss the carbon tax and price adjustments. Thank you. Hello everyone, I welcome you to the course on energy and carbon market. I welcome you to the course on energy and carbon markets. Now coming to the part one, introduction to the climate change. Climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. It is mostly derived from the fossil fuels, combustion for energy, industry and transportation. Okay, and this constitutes about the 73% of the global emissions, while deforestation and the agriculture contribute about 22% in the global emissions. There have been, international regime for climate stabilization, like UNFCCC was established in 1992. Then Kyoto Protocol was developed in 1997, and the Paris Agreement was developed in 2015. Okay, and the under these, climate stabilization uh, commitments, the governments of the various countries have to propose their national determined contribution and the net zero goals. Okay, for example, government of India have all, uh, proposed their NDC to reduce their GHG emissions by 33% by 2030 and achieve the net zero emission goals by 2070. Okay. So there are market mechanisms under the Paris Climate Agreement, in which the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement enables the international carbon markets and Clean Development Mechanism (CDM), which was inherited from the Kyoto Protocol, and the new Sustainable Development Mechanism, which is SDM, and this derives its power from the Article 6.2 of the bilateral cooperation. Okay, and there are, various mechanisms which has been developed for the mitigating the climate change. and one of which is the carbon capture, utilization, and storage mechanism. So this includes the carbon capture by trapping CO2 from the uh, air, okay, and utilization uh, of the captured carbon, and uh, by converting into the products like concrete and fuels, and or it can be stored to sequester in the underground facility. Okay, so that's why it comes the terms of the carbon capture, utilization, and storage. There are over 40 commercial facility operating globally in US and Norway. Okay, with a capacity of about 45 million tons CO2 equivalent per year for the carbon CCUS projects. Okay, for example, the Gorgon project in Australia store about 4 million tons of CO2 equivalent annually, while in EU Innovation Fund, this supports the Sweden hybrid fossil free steel program. Okay, under the US Innovation Fund. In the Indian context, India have developed National Action Plan on Climate Change (NAPCC), National Adaptation Plan (NAP), and biennial update reports to inform the global community on the advancement of and India's progress uh, on its NDC for the emission targets. Okay, the government has also introduced the market mechanisms like PAT scheme, renewable energy certificate REC, lifestyle for environment life. Okay, also like renewable purchase obligation RPO, Ujala scheme for LED distributions, National Solar Mission. Government of India has also launched the National Solar Mission and Green Energy Corridor projects to enable the Indian, uh, you know, energy market with the renewable energy systems. Okay, there are various. Now coming to the part three, which is the carbon assessment techniques. The carbon dioxide is considered as the base for estimating the global warming potential of the various greenhouse gases. Okay, for example, methane. Methane is 28 times more potent GHG gas than carbon dioxide, and the methane emission is mostly comes from the agriculture activity, landfills, and fossil fuel extraction. Similarly, nitrous oxide, sorry, N2O, is 265 times more potent global warming potential than carbon dioxide, and this nitrous oxide emissions comes mostly from the agriculture and industrial processes. Similarly, hydrofluorocarbons HFCs are about 100 to 12,000 times more potent GHG than carbon dioxide. Okay, and the refrigerants, aerosols, aluminum production are the major sources of the hydrofluorocarbons. Similarly, the sulfur hexafluoride SF6 is having the highest GWP potential till known today. Okay, which is about more about 23 and a half thousand more potent than CO2, and this emission comes mostly from the electrical insulations. So there are various carbon accounting methodology. This includes the spent-based analysis, activity-based analysis, and hybrid-based. Under the spent-based methodology, emissions from the financial data is considered, and the advantages of the spent-based analysis is very simple and very easy to implement. However, this methodology is very less accurate, and it mostly relies on the average data. Also, uh, if some company is under-reporting its you know, expenses and the cost, so its carbon accounting will be less. However, which could lead into the discrepancy in the accurate or accuracy of the analysis for the carbon accounting. Okay. Similarly, the other methodology for carbon accounting is activity based. This includes the kind of the activity which the processes is happening under any business entity like industry or the company. So it captures emissions from the activity data. Okay. And this is more accurate than the spent based analysis methodology. However, this is very intensive and the data collection is very complex. So there is a hybrid methodology which you know, includes the advantages of the activity based data and spent based data. Okay. And this you know, inculcates the a balanced approach with accuracy and coverage. Okay. However, the hybrid methodology requires a careful integration of the both activity and the financial data. Okay. Now coming to the scoping of the GHG emissions. All the GHG emissions are scoped under three parameters. Okay. Under the scope one, mostly the direct emissions from the owned sources are considered, like fuel combustion on-site company vehicles, and under the scope 2 indirect emissions are considered. Okay, like indirect emissions from the purchased energy, like electricity, steam, heating, and under scope 3 other indirect emissions in the value chain is considered, like emissions from the supply chain, business travel, and waste. Now coming to the IPCC inventory for the sectors and the emission sources. So IPCC categorized the emissions under the four sectors. Okay, the first sector is energy, which consider the emissions from the fossil fuel combustion and fugitive emissions. The second sector is industrial processes and products, which is IPPU. This consider the emissions from the cement production and the chemical processes. The third sector is agriculture, forestry, and other land use, AFOLU, which considers emissions from the antique formation, rice cultivation, deforestation, and the other agriculture activities. And the fourth sector is the waste sector, which considers the emissions from the landfills, water treatment, and the similar other processes. Okay, so there are various IPCC guidelines for the national GHG inventory, which guides the various government to estimate their and report their GHG emissions. Okay, this includes the defining the boundary for carbon footprint estimation, data collection, emission factors, calculation, and reporting. Okay, the policy regulations and protocols involves the greenhouse gas protocols, GG protocols, IPCC guidelines, ISO 14064, Bilan GS, which is mostly developed and applied in the France geographical boundary of France. Okay, there are also guidelines on the sectoral approach for dividing the emissions into energy, IPPUs, AFOLU, and the waste sectors. Also, uh, the IPCC guidelines clarified on the emission factors in the activity data, which provides the default emission factors and the guideline on collecting the country-specific data. This also includes the quality assurance and the and control guideline, which ensures the data accuracy, consistency, and transparency. And the IPCC guidelines also provide a reporting format for the standardized inventory submissions to the UNFCCC. Now coming to the carbon market, and you know, the benefits of the government efforts for the decarbonizing the energy sector or the industrial processes, agriculture sector or the waste sector is linked with the intensive of the carbon credit trading in the carbon market. Okay, so for their various key carbon pricing mechanism and the has been developed for the price incentives and the cost. Okay, so the coming to the first mechanism is the carbon tax. This is a direct tax on CO2 emission, and this incentivizes or kind of uh, this provides a clear incentive over the reduction of the GHG in the industrial processes. Okay, and mostly Sweden and Canada are implementing the carbon tax mechanism. Okay, there is one mechanism called cap and trade. This sets up a cap on the emissions and permits traded, uh, you know, uh, trade among the emitters. Okay, emitters in the sense that means they can, trade their carbon credits among the entities. Like this also include the cost trading, market drive intensives, and the cap and trade mechanism is mostly implemented by European Union. Okay, there is also one mechanism called internal pricing, which shadow the price used by the company for the decision making. Okay, and this mechanism is very company specific, and the multinational firms uses this mechanism in the carbon market. And the fourth one is a voluntary market, in which credits are bought voluntarily to offset the emissions. Okay, and the this mechanism is mostly the project based, and company like Gold Standard, Vera are the facilitating the voluntary carbon market. Okay, so where there are the various features of the cap and trade and the carbon trading mechanism. The first one is regulation. Mostly cap and trade comes under the government mandate, and carbon credit is mostly the voluntary. Okay. However, this can be made mandatory. Uh, and cap and trade is mostly it was introduced for the purpose of meeting the legal emission targets and through the market actions open auction in the market. Okay, however, the carbon trading was mostly introduced for the purpose of reducing emissions offset and CSR activities. Okay, and you know this mechanism was introduced for stabilizing the price in the voluntary carbon market. Uh, if we talk the carbon market mechanisms in India, there are three carbon market mechanism. The first one is PAT scheme. This covers the energy sector, and which is it's the mandatory compliance, not voluntary. Okay, the REC market, this covers the power sector, which is under the renewable energy, and this is a voluntary type mechanism. However, the carbon market is a multiple sectoral coverage kind of mechanism, and this is planned in Indian scenario and not uh, currently applicable, or this is under the design, not completely developed. Okay, and this scheme of carbon market is expected to a compliance based, not the voluntary based. And there are various internal carbon pricing and labeling mechanism, and um, they cover the different scenario. Okay, under like internal carbon pricing covers the companies, and the carbon labeling covers the consumers, mostly the consumers. Internal carbon pricing was developed for the purpose of risk assessment and investment decision only. However, the carbon labeling was introduced for the consumer information and transparency. The internal carbon pricing mostly, shadow the price for the internal policy only. However, the carbon labeling puts a label on the product, and this is a kind of the certification uh, mechanism. Okay, mostly carbon labeling is done on the products like electronics, apparel, food. However, the internal carbon pricing is adopted by the multinational firms, banks, etc. So there are various, carbon tax and price adjustment mechanism. Uh, Carbon tax was introduced for the domestic purpose, and to inform the domestic producer about their emissions so that they can reduce their emissions. Okay, and carbon tax, it's a kind of direct levy on the emissions from the domestic emitters. The countries like Sweden and Canada has implemented the carbon tax mechanism. However, the price adjustment was introduced for the importers and the foreign producers, and this was to introduce to prevent the carbon leakage. Okay, and provide a level playing field for the all the entities associated in the carbon market with the emission reduction processes. Okay, and this is a tariff based mechanism which is directly linked with the emissions. Yeah. Okay, and the price adjustment has been implemented by European Union. Oh, thank you.